Did we do it? We did it. All right, let's go. That's credits, baby. All right, let's talk about the ups and downs of Dungeons of Hinterberg. Let me just start out by saying that I am incredibly impressed with this game overall. I went into this thinking, well, it's on Game Pass, so it's not like I have to buy it. It looks a little cozy for my taste, but you know, at the end of the day, worst case scenario, it'll be an easy game to add to my list of beaten games, and you know, we'll move on to the next thing after that. Probably take me, 2 or 3 days on this, and then we'll move on. I totally underestimated how awesome this game is. Let me explain why. So there's something that's really, so it does have a really good balance, maybe the best balance I've ever seen of those cozy / dungeon crawler type games. So I'm thinking games like Cult of the Lamb, Boyfriend Dungeon, Thirsty Suitors. There have been a lot of games recently that have come out that have been like they're relationship managers and all that stuff, but then they're also, you go out and fight and kill, and you talk to Dreamscaper is another good example of, and then you go and like you build relationships with people, and as you build those relationships you get perks, and then you go out and, or whatever you do with your town or whatever, if it's Cult of the Lamb or something. But I've played several of those now. It's a newer subgenre that's come about just recently, and I'm not saying this is the best one I've ever played, because Dreamscaper blew my freaking mind. But it was far more impressive than I expected. I was expecting something like Thirsty Suitors or Boyfriend Dungeon, something where it's like, yeah, it's cute and it's got some comedy and whatever, but the combat is a joke pretty much, and it's really more about the relationship stuff and the town building or whatever the case may be. The focus is more on that, and the combat's then there just to mix things up a little bit. No. This is a nice little 50-50. The combat can be quite challenging. I mean, I died 167 times. Now, I have to admit, probably 120 of those were just falling off cliffs. In combat, I probably only died 50 times or so, but still, I mean, that's not nothing. And a lot of that was because I was maybe trying to do something that I was underleveled for. But let me get back to it. The grind of this game, the gameplay loop of going out in the day, conquering a dungeon, and then going back home and talking to people and trying to get better perks, more money, yada yada, for the next dungeon trek. That was an extremely satisfying gameplay loop. It was a lot of fun, and once it became clear what we were trying to do, working toward that goal was a lot of fun. Trying to get all of these dungeons completed with and trying to make the most out of a day. Okay, it's day 16. Let's make sure we get a dungeon done. Let's make sure we talk to this person. Let's make sure we give a gift to that person. Just that gameplay loop is really satisfying. As far as the story goes, I think the story is a big part of what makes this game interesting, because it does do a really good job of, as you progress in the game, which you have a lot of freedom in how you're going to do that. You can do the dungeons in not any order you want, because some of them aren't available at first, but you have a lot of freedom with the order in which you do the dungeons, with which people you want to talk to. And the game does a good job as you proceed with kind of drip feeding story and how that's developing and what the real issue is with this town and all that stuff. That becomes clear in a very gradual and satisfying way. And it's a really cool story. It's an interesting take on the dungeon crawler, that you have this town that's just a dungeon crawling tourist attraction. It's a cool idea. I thought that the characters were well written. They're not voiced, but I thought they were well written. I did genuinely like some of the characters. I thought they were genuinely interesting. The combat is surprisingly satisfying for a game like this. There is an immense amount of variety, because each biome, there are several biomes in the game, and each one you have different magic spells. So you have to remember what you can cast and what you can't, depending on which biome you're in. And those magic abilities also double as traversal Metroidvania style kind of like traversal abilities. Like you can make a big jelly block that freezes enemies, but also is something you can climb. There's a lot of that kind of stuff in this game, and it's really cleverly done. It's really, really interestingly done. And then you have your regular sword attacks. You have gear. There's a gear progression in this game. The game does a really good job of gradually, continuously giving you better and better gear that's satisfying to, like, if you get a chest in this game, like, there's a good chance there's going to be something good in it. And it does a really good job of giving you lots of options with sword enchantments and armor upgrades. And then you have these, aside from your magical abilities, you have these attack conduits that you can find in the world in chests or whatever, or from beating bosses, or you can buy them, certain ones, and you can equip those as well, and they give you certain abilities. All that is it's just very well thought out and very fleshed out and very complex and good. Not overly complex. It's not overwhelming, but there is some complexity to the combat and the way that the combat is built. If we're getting into critiques while we're on the subject of combat, I will say that the bosses, while I really enjoyed most of them, really enjoyed a couple of them, they were pretty easy. Most of them were pretty easy. There were only two that I thought were fairly difficult, and only one was difficult in like a real boss fight kind of way. The other one was kind of a puzzle fight that was just really tricky. There's a lot of puzzle fights in the boss fights in this game where it's like, it's not really about just how good you are. It's, you've got to like shoot the targets to make the boss vulnerable, kind of that kind of stuff. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with those types of fights. They weren't all like that, but most of them had some kind of bend like that. But when it came down to the actual combat, I wasn't over leveled or anything, but I was OP. My attack conduits were, I would shred a boss's half of their health with a single move sometimes, if it was just standard battles. The ones that were more puzzle fight-ish were harder, a lot harder, because it didn't matter how good you were, or how much damage you were doing. It was more about like shooting specific targets or running to certain places in time and things like that. But so the boss fights were, I think, a low point of the experience. They weren't bad, but compared to everything else, I thought they were a bit underwhelming. There were some combat issues with the camera. The camera in this game will just freak out on you sometimes. It just doesn't make any sense. It'll go straight up into the air or right down into the ground, or if you're against a wall, it'll just wig out. The camera is rough. It wasn't a constant issue, but it came up a lot. So the camera was kind of rough. Beyond that, there was a couple little glitches, like the game crashed a couple of times. It's a launch game, so I always give a little bit of leeway for that. But it wasn't the game. The game is constantly giving you checkpoints, so it doesn't really matter. You only lose a couple minutes just loading back in. If you don't, it's really impossible to lose a lot of progress in this game. And also, like when you die in this game, and this maybe is a bit of a critique, but when you die, there's literally no penalty for dying. If you die in a battle encounter, whether you saved or not, it'll just put you right in front of it again. In fact, that's a good way to get your health bar back up. Oh, actually, it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. I misspoke. It'll give you whatever your health was when you started the fight, but the checkpoints are basically constant. So there's really no penalty for dying in this game. So that makes it a little bit easier too. Overall, I think normal, if you're going to play this game on normal, you should expect a fairly easy time. The only time I really struggled is when I was doing things that were beyond my level. But I will also say that the puzzles, because this game has a lot of puzzles, a lot of environmental puzzles. Some of them were really, really easy and basically did themselves, but there were some that were tough. I got stumped, especially later in the game when the dungeons were a lot bigger, longer, more complicated. I got stumped several times, and there is a lot of ingenuity in the dungeons. There's 25 dungeons in this game. All of them have different types of puzzles. They don't really reuse a lot of stuff. It's every dungeon something a little bit different. So I was really impressed by that too. I can't really think of any other critiques. The bottom line is that this game blew me away. It's not a super sweaty game. It's not a Souls-like. It's a lot of, if you're going to play this game, it's a lot of pretty straightforward combat that's pretty satisfying, a lot of fun, if maybe a little bit easy. Some really good and really tricky some environmental puzzles, and just some good old-fashioned gear progression, loot progression, leveling up of different stats, that kind of thing. Becoming friends with people in the village that give you, when you become friends with this certain person, you get more HP. When you get friends with this certain person, you get better magical attack, like that kind of stuff. But I really, really had a great time with it. I got completely lost in this game. This is one of those games that I play maybe 15 of a year, where when I go to bed, I'm like dreaming about it, and I'm like thinking about it all the time when I'm not playing it, because it's just a very interesting game. It's really, really good. It is. I don't know how much it costs, because I played it on Game Pass, but whatever it costs, unless it's like more than $50, I doubt it. It's definitely worth it. It's absolutely worth playing. I spent a long time, at least 15 hours on this game, and it was, there's a bunch of stuff I could have done that I didn't. So I really, really liked it. All right, that's it. I'll stop gushing. Last couple orders of business. Our counter here says that we have beaten 69 games in 2024. And 516 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are lies. We've now beaten 70 games in 2024 and 517 since we started doing this in 2020. Let's go. All right. Last little tidbit here. Dungeons of Hinterberg. It has been an absolute delight. But we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye. Thank you. You were awesome.